This is the English Suite podcast. I'm Gabby Norris. Today's show features creative writer Sherrie Flick. Sherrie Flick is the author of the novel Reconsidering Happiness, the flash fiction chapbook I Call This Flirting, and 2 short story collections with Autumn House Press, Whiskey, Etc., and Thank Your Lucky Stars. Her nonfiction has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, Creative Nonfiction, Pittsburgh Quarterly, and Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Each semester, the Widener University Visiting Writer Series welcomes authors and poets for a half-week residency. The writer visits classrooms, conducts one-on-one tutorials with writing majors, and holds a public reading for the university community. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the series has continued in virtual fashion. In today's show, you will hear excerpts from 2 short stories by Sherrie Flick and her responses to questions from the audience. The event was held in October of 2021 over Zoom. We begin with an excerpt from Widener student Shpresa Ymeraj, who introduced our special guest writer.
In my creative writing class, we have been reading and discussing Thank Your Lucky Stars, Professor Flick's most recent collection of stories. There's been much to talk about, characters, setting, and story structure, just to name a few. But one thing that captured my attention were unifying threads tying the pieces together. The yellow wall and a window, the light filtered through, is a velvety blue, is the first sentence of the last story, Ashes, in Thank Your Lucky Stars. The unified thread of light runs through the stories from the yellow, which perhaps signifies the brighter moments, in contrast with those more mysterious or troublesome velvety blue, all the way to the mystical, magical stars. In longer narrations, such as Open and Shut, one can relate to the inward looking, and the light thread can be traced to the beginning. The cherub waterfall trickles, and sunlight spills through the delicate branches of the trees. The story develops chronologically backward, like a memory. Like pulling a thread from its end, one can follow the plot to the beginning and experience and understand beyond the point of conflict. Another thread connects the stories Ashes and Conduit stylistically. An unchanging character, a woman who serves as a catalyst, facilitating the plot's development. One can imagine her to be the narrator, subconsciously leading the way, or simply an efficient literary device used to shed light on the main characters. As you listen to the reading this evening, appreciate the many subtleties of these oftentimes very brief stories. But also keep an eye out for the threads that tie these pieces together. Please join me in welcoming Sherrie Flick.
Thank you so much for coming out tonight. It's been wonderful talking to the students in the classes. Wonderful, smart students with all kinds of insights. Tonight, I'm going to read a variety of stories from my 2 collections and then one brand new story that I've never read before. We'll see how that goes. The first story is from my collection, Whiskey, Etc. And with my introduction, since I'm here as a teaching artist, I'll maybe give a little bit of insight into process before I begin. This story arose from a series of exercises that I was doing that were mostly failures. My challenge was I had to write a story connected to whatever song was on the radio when I started. So this was one of the only ones that succeeded from that series of exercises. It's called Sweet Thing. I'm a sweet thing. That's what the song on the radio keeps repeating. Sweet thing, sweet thing, sweet thing. And with this sun trickling in, I do kind of feel it, yes. I'm a sweet thing about to take the garbage to the can, about to drag the dresser across the hallway. I'm a sweet thing scrubbing out the crisper drawer of the fridge. Sugar baby, yeah. Later, I am not so sweet. All good must come to an end. I wait in the foyer. It strikes me as odd that I once had a foyer. In fact, it strikes me as odd that I now pronounce it correctly. I never thought it would come to this, of course, but I wait here, slumped a bit against the wall, looking at the dwindling light and how it plays off the mirror. The house is quiet, only the radio babbling a dull pop music hangover. Jeff looks frazzled when he jiggles in through the front door. The lock has always stuck. His black hair, still black after all these years, looks lush. And he looks good in a suit, always has. He barges into his own home and stops short when he sees me, slouched as I am against the wall. He stops short, like in a movie. Here is where I pull out a gun and shoot him, in the movie version, that is. In this version, I sigh, I say, Jeffrey, and shoot him, in the movie version, that is. In this version, I sigh, I say, Jeffrey.
You have been listening to an excerpt from Sherrie Flick's short story, Sweet Thing. Let's listen to another excerpt, this one from her story, The Bottle.
Francine cracked the bottle on the edge of the table. She smashed it twice. It was a thick wine bottle, and it blossomed open with ragged edges. Afterward, she set the bottle upright on the tabletop, its fractured top like a crown. The table's slippery wooden surface smelled of lemon oil and perfectly reflected the bottle in reverse. The candles sputtered and little pins of light bounced back off the green glass. Francine's eyebrows tilted toward the bridge of her nose, sloped in to say she was thinking hard. Seth watched her eyes, the thoughts ticking through. He considered the possibilities from here on in. Everything changes when someone smashes a wine bottle without preamble or warning. Have a bad day, Francie? Seth finally asked, leaning back in his chair. The chair's two back legs ground some loose glass into the wooden floorboards. The accountant's at your back again. He twisted his napkin from his lap, laid it out on the table like a broken bird. They'd been having a fine dinner. Seth had come home early to get things going. He rinsed the Brussels sprouts, fresh and in season, then let them soak in salted water until they sparkled green. He chopped up garlic and sauteed it until it was crispy. He cooked some ham and pasta, pulled a bottle of red from the rack, and splashed the wine into big goblet glasses. Now the empty bottle balanced on the table like a dare. Francine eyed the fractured bottle. She felt better for sure, but now she'd have to explain herself. She hated words. They did her in every time. What she wanted was action, action without repercussion or discussion, pure, clean decision-making. But she knew this wasn't how the world worked, or it wasn't how Seth's world worked. Things were talked through and hashed and rehashed and reasoned. She wanted some unreasonableness every now and then. Was that asking too much?
After completing her reading, Sherrie took questions about her writing and writing craft from the Zoom audience. Most of the questions came in via Zoom chat. We have transcribed the questions and repeat them here to recreate the give and take atmosphere. Do you come up with your titles before you write the story or after?
You know, I used to write from the title quite often, but these days, the title, I do title them afterwards. And I take a lot of time titling, kind of figuring out what objects or phrases in the story can be kind of highlighted or resonated via the title, or if I can tap into a theme with the title. So I kind of love titles, so I spend a lot of time on them.
What is the difference for you when you're writing a conventional length story versus a flash fiction? And then the other question would be, how do you figure out what to leave out in a flash?
It's the hard question, right? I would say with the longer stories that I read, and I would say everything I read tonight, 1,200 words or less, right? So they still kind of in their flash fiction length stories. Right. Those longer ones, I think of as a fuller narrative. So the first one, Sweet Thing, you know, I think of it as these two characters have a full life, and I kind of can think deeply back into it as I'm writing the story. I also use almost all the craft elements. So characterization, setting, dialogue, all the craft elements are in there, but they're compressed. Where with the dinner party story that I read, we have dialogue, we have setting. It's more of an impression and atmosphere for me. I don't feel the need to name these characters or understand their psychology. That one is more of a kind of diving into a kind of societal state, the way we do dinner parties here in America. So oftentimes those shorter ones are more impressionistic. Emotion leads the way. What to leave out? I do a lot of editing. I draft really fast and messy, and then I cut. I don't tend to super overwrite, but I rewrite almost everything because I like really tight sentence structure. So for me, once I get the essence of the story down, then it's tightening and seeing really how much I can cut. My husband's a really good editor and he reads all my work. And sometimes I'll hand him an edited story and he's like, there's nothing left. Like you've cut everything. There's like an apple, you have to put stuff back in, so I really do try to pull it back. And sometimes I do have to like reverse engineer it back into a scene with more detail. I must say though, I naturally compress work. So that's part of it too. It's harder for me to write long than short. So I think it's more of my nature to write short. When you're reading a piece of flash fiction, your brain is filling in part of the scene. And quite often, there are certain stories that people have read and they tell me they go back and they think of them as being like 10 pages long or something. And they go back to read them and realize they're a page and a half long, and it's because they have filled in the broader story, which is kind of a goal. It's interactive in that way. You're asking the reader to do some work, which I also like. I mean, I'm very interested in Gertrude Stein and Sherwood Anderson, all the modernists, and the kind of way that they played with that idea of like breaking down that boundary between reader and writer.
Have you ever been interested in poetry?
I started off writing poetry. That was what I went into my undergrad. I studied with Charles Simic, who at the time, just by complete accident, was writing a bunch of really excellent prose poems. And so I did work with him, but then I kind of didn't understand line breaks. I didn't understand poetry. It didn't fit quite right. And I switched to fiction and eventually found flash fiction, which kind of bridges the two. But poetry did teach me how to pay attention to words and rhythm. So I feel like I was really fortunate to have studied it.
Which narrative point of view do you prefer, first person or third person?
I prefer third person, actually. I like third person close to one character. So it's all kind of reading like first person. I use that point of view a lot. Although I do end up writing in first person. I think third person gives you so much more room to write a more complex story, to go into multiple points of view. I think it helps with setting too. But I write in just about everything. I've written some stories in second person too, which I don't always love second person, but sometimes it works really, really well.
Any advice for becoming as successful as you?
That's kind of funny. No, I don't have it. My advice is to write what you believe in and to write every day, if you can, or as often as you can. And, to figure out a way to have a schedule in your life so that you can meet other creative people. I mean, for me, I don't know if it leads to my success, but it leads to my happiness. I surround myself with artists of all kind, and I learn a lot from them, and I like being in a creative world. And I think that helps you understand creativity and art better. And I don't know if it leads to success, but it's just working hard like any other kind of job, really.
How have you been able to move past writer's block?
So for me, I tend to work on more than one project at once. So for instance, I'm working on a collection of nonfiction essays right now, long form nonfiction. And when I get stuck, I write some bear stories, right? It's easy. And so I procrastinate one project off another. I've done this forever. I've done this since I was an undergrad, studying for one class and like burning out and then moving and studying for another class instead. So I do that. I'm a big list maker, and that helps me kind of procrastinate one thing off of another. The other thing I do, I mentioned this in one or possibly both classes. I'm very interested in creativity and how our brain works toward creativity and brainstorming. And there's a lot of science about walking in creativity. So if I am truly stuck and on deadline, which is different than being stuck and not on deadline, I will get up and there's a 10-minute loop that I walk right near my house. I walk that 10-minute loop and I sit down and I generally can go forward from there. And what the scientists say is that you should walk for at least 8 minutes. So if you have a problem, have that problem in your head, go out, walk for 8 minutes. And when you sit back down, you should be able to brainstorm 100% better. So that's what definitely walking is super important to my writing and my life and my brain. So I would really suggest trying that. It's really kind of amazing how new ideas can come into your head, or you can solve a problem as you're walking.
You mentioned preferring to write shorter and more compressed prose. Having experienced writing and publishing a novel, what would motivate you to return to the longer genre? Are you already thinking about it?
So I would say writing the novel was the hardest thing I've ever done, except maybe taking my 19th century British literature comprehensive exam for my master's degree, which I still can't believe I passed. So writing the novel was shockingly difficult because you have to live in the world that you've created for so long. And I enjoyed it. I now know how much stamina I have to do it. And so I'd like to write another novel, but I know I need a certain kind of time and space in order to do it. I have a novel kind of half drafted that I started a while ago that I haven't turned back to because I was putting these collections together, and then I started writing this nonfiction. But I think I could turn back to it. I mean, I will turn back to it. And if I like what I've written, I could see moving forward with it. The way I should say, I didn't outline my first novel. I'm not an outliner. I'm not use index cards somehow to structure it. I'm not a planner. So my first novel, or my debut novel, or my only novel, I was at a residency at UCross, Wyoming for 4 weeks. And I drafted the whole book there, right? So that's not really the way to do it, but that's what I did. I just I wrote 8 hours a day, and I wrote 70,000 words, and I had the shape of the book. Then I revised it for like 3 or 4 years. And that might be my process, but then I would need 4 weeks with, no interruption. So we'll see. I learned so much from writing the novel that I would like to write another one, because it helped me understand setting and helped me understand that really long narrative arc that you need to get with a long book. Yeah, I think I encourage you, if you're a writer out there in Zoom land, I really encourage you to cross over to other genres, even if you don't feel you're that great at it. I feel like I've learned so much from trying my hand at nonfiction or writing the novel. I carry so much back to my primary genre of fiction when I do kind of cross over, because of course they're all interrelated.
What inspires you to write?
Images do, beauty, complicated ideas and concepts that I like to explore through my characters. That kind of inspires me to write. Reading other people's work and being blown away by it, and wanting to try some techniques that I see, that I read, definitely inspires me. I also read a lot of biographies. I just finished maybe a month ago the Georgia O'Keeffe biography that Roxana Robinson wrote. I don't know if anybody's read that. It's gigantic. It's such a pandemic thing to read. It's like I don't know, 750 pages. And her life was, super interesting, and so I get inspired by reading other artists and their lives, and that kind of then turns me back to the page.
This is a more general question. Being a published writer and knowing what you know now, is there anything you would say if you could go back and tell your younger self? Not necessarily advice, but things you wish you would have paid more attention to or less attention to when you were a younger writer.
I used to have this little piece of paper on my computer before I had a laptop computer. I had a desktop computer. I had a little piece of paper taped to it that said, knock it off, right? And that was like really excellent advice for myself for a variety of reasons. But I think when people tell you that your work has promise, they tend to mean it. And I think for the longest time, I thought people were being nice to me, And so a kind of confidence, I guess, that maybe I wish I had maybe more confidence early on. Don't be afraid to write to writers who you like and introduce yourself and say you like their work. You can really strike up wonderful friendships that way. I really like Stuart Dybek's work, and I noticed he had a lot of trains in his stories, and I at that time had a lot of trains in my stories, and so I just wrote to him. I was like, I love the way you use trains in your stories, and he just kind of geeked out on that because he does love trains. And so we then had this letter. This was back when you handwrote letters. We had this letter correspondence for, I don't know, a few months. And then eventually he read in Pittsburgh, and I said, hi, I'm Sherrie Flick. We used to write letters, and, he remembered me. It was just like this nice kind of creative exchange of ideas. And I think often we all hold back and are afraid to tell someone that that you like their work. And I think I encourage people to do that. Yeah. Be part of the community in that way.
Last question. How does writing inspire your life and give you a new look on life?
It's very fluid. Writing's part of my life. It can't be detached at this point. And I think I used to more actively kind of take little notes in my day. And now I kind of sit down to write. And I think I'm storing a lot of stuff in my head instead. So I feel like I can't separate it from my daily life. It's all kind of one big pile. But there are ideas for nonfiction and ideas for fiction. I have to keep those separate, But yeah, writing inspires my life because it kind of is my life. So like it's all kind of the same thing. I don't know what I would do if I wasn't writing.
For more information about Sherrie Flick, visit sherrieflick.com. We will include a link to her website in our show description. The English Suite is produced by Jim Esch and students at Widener University. Shpresa Ymeraj, Sienna Bowers, Gabby Norris, Chloe DeFlumery, and Courtney Farina. You can find our podcast at anchor.fm, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcast directories. We would love to hear your feedback, announcements, and suggestions. Send an email to widenerenglishsuite@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.